Hey, welcome back to the Big Rand Show. As always, thank you for joining me. If you could, hit the subscribe button down below and let's get right to it. Now, the Trump administration is back at it again. They're back at attacking the LGBTQ community here in the United States once again. They have filed another brief saying that Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act does not pertain to people who were transgender. They filed a brief with the Supreme Court on Friday. Of course, that's also the same day that he locked up that nomination, or that endorsement for the nomination from the Log Cabin Republicans, a block of LGBT Republicans. It's funny how the news media covered this, because the news media covered, oh, he got the endorsement from the Log Cabin Republicans. He's pro gay rights, blah 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 blah. And then underneath that, they slipped this in. I will no longer support a president. I cannot even come to his defense anymore because of this. I was having a hard enough time after his comments led to the shootings, or that shooting down in El Paso. And now he's going after the LGBTQ community. Well, let's get into it. His Justice Department wrote in their brief, Title VII does not prohibit discrimination against transgender persons based on transgender status. It simply does not speak to discrimination because of an individual's gender identity or disconnect between a gender identity and the individual's sex. Now, the thing is, for years, Title VII has pertained to that. Now, that's not explicitly written in the law, but it's been understood by the courts to expand to that. It all comes from a case stemming from a 2006 firing of a trans person by the name of Amy Stevens. Amy Stevens reportedly was born a man, got the job at RG and GR Harris Funeral Homes in Michigan in 2007. 6 years later, she came out as trans and transitioned. Subsequently was fired from her job simply because they transitioned from having a male sex to a female sex. They went from being man to woman. So they decided to be themselves and they got fired for it. Isn't it funny in this country how everyone's supposed to have rights unless you don't agree with them? Ever notice that? But that's exactly what happened. According to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, it was found to be discriminatory. The unrefuted facts show the funeral home fired Stevens because she refused to abide by the employer's stereotypical conception of her sex. Discrimination against employees either because of their failure to conform to sex stereotypes or their transgender or transitioning status is illegal under Title VII, the court said. It went on to say, it is impossible to fire an employee based on an employee's status as a transgender person without being motivated, at least in part, by the employee's sex. So the Trump administration has gone to the Supreme Court and said, you should be allowed to discriminate. That the Civil Rights Act of 64 should have nothing to do with it. Now, here's my thing. People's rights are their rights. You're not supposed to be able to take those away. You know what I'm saying? We have certain unalienable rights. Is that not what it said? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Even though the original, I believe, was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. So this is America. You should be free to be who you are. And you should not be fired simply because you're either gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or what have you. You should never lose your job for that. And to think that it can change on a whim. Just whoever's in president can change what happens there. You know, and that's what's going on right now. And I'll get to a solution for this in just a minute. It says the Justice Department also went on to say that the ordinary public meaning of sex was biological sex back when the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64. They went on to say it does not encompass transgender status, which Stevens and the Sixth Circuit Court described as a disconnect between an individual's biological sex and gender identity. In the particular context of Title VII, legislation originally designed to eliminate employment discrimination against racial and other minorities is especially clear that the prohibition on discrimination based on sex referred to equal treatment of men and women in the workplace. So this is a major thing. This could really have a wide-ranging effect on the trans community. People trying to get a job, trying to do the job the way just trying to make it through life. And they could lose their jobs simply because they transitioned or they're in the middle of a transition, which means they could lose their health care, which means they might not be able to finish their transition. And that could have devastating effects on that individual, their families, and their mental health. And a lot of people get their job or get their insurance from their job. That's just a fact of the matter. That's how it is. In a lot of places, and a lot of people, that's how they get their insurance. So if they lose their job, they could lose a lot. But Chase Strangio, Chase Strangio or whatever. I can't pronounce names, so if I'm butchering that name, I am sorry. Please forgive me. He's a staff attorney for the ACLU, which is representing Stevens in the suit, argued that the case has implications beyond the trans community. People don't realize the stakes that are extending not just to the trans and LGBT communities, but every person who depends or who departs from sexual stereotypes. Women who want to wear pants in the workplace, men who want to do more, have more responsibility with their children. Those protections are also in peril with this argument advanced by the Trump administration presented to the Supreme Court. He went on to say, there isn't a coherent way to carve out LGBT people without changing the standards that exist under the law. And that is where I come to my solution. We need to call on Congress. We need to call on Congress today and demand that there be a new Civil Rights Act passed, an LGBTQ Civil Rights Act passed. It needs to be passed. It must be passed because people's rights should not be a whim. They should not be decided on because of whoever's sitting in the White House. So if we have to pass another Civil Rights Act for LGBTQ community people, then by God, we need to do it. Because this is wrong. People should not be able to be fired or paid less simply because they transition from one gender to another, or because of who they love. It's just totally un-American. But that's not the only case that the Trump administration is jumping in on here. The Supreme Court is also looking at 2 cases, according to the article here, of employees fired over their sexual orientation. In the Altitude Express Inc. versus Zarda, a Long Island skydiving instructor, Don Zarda, was fired after he told a client he was gay. Last year, the Second Court of Appeals ruled that Zarda's firing was discriminatory. But the 11th Circuit, in a similar case, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, ruled the precedent suggested Title VII did not protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation. That is also based on a brief as well that they filed with the Supreme Court, the Trump administration filed with the Supreme Court in June of 2017, where they said that Title VII and that the other protections in housing in the Civil Rights Act did not pertain to people of the LGBTQ community. Tell me again how Trump is good for the gay community or the lesbian community or just, the LGBTQ community in general. Tell me how he is good for these people. Tell them they can be fired simply for who they love. Tell them they can be fired simply for being who they are. The hell kind of country do we live in? That's not the America I want. That's not the America I want to live in. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that the right people are elected in this country. I will be sure to try to get the vote out best I can. I will show you the different people who are running for office and who will do the best for the LGBTQ community based on what I have seen. This is disgusting. This is beyond what anybody should be dealing with in America. But unfortunately, as you see, people are still getting fired. Here in Texas, we have no state protections against the LGBTQ community being fired for being who they are, or for discriminating them against living in housing. And you would think in 2019, we wouldn't be dealing with this shit anymore. Well, you would think it would be over, but it's not. So Congress, you need to pass a new Civil Rights Act for the LGBTQ community. Plain and simple. It needs to be passed immediately. And it needs to have bipartisan support. Call your congressman. I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat. Demand a new LGBTQ Civil Rights Act of 2019. Demand the rights that should be given to everybody in America. Not just white Americans, not just black Americans, not just straight Americans, but to all Americans. We need the Equality Act, and we need it now. Demand it. Have a great day. I'll see you down the road.